Hello and welcome to another edition of the Diversified Semantic Layer podcast. I'm joined by a motley crew. I got Jamie, Mike, Mustafa, and Robert. What's up, dudes?
Hey, how's it going?
Happy Friday.
And actually, one guy that's probably upside down.
Yeah, happy Saturday in my case.
Happy Saturday, yeah.
I haven't seen a Bloody Mary or a mimosa yet, so I guess you didn't accept that challenge.
Well, it's not the challenge. It's still, I'll confess, it's still a little bit early, and and also it's just a bit of my lack of preparation. I'll confess. Otherwise, I'll probably have one later on.
I would have had them all mixed up and in the fridge and ready to go, so that when I woke up.
Yes, I know. That's the sound of experience there.
It's not my first time.
Is there a market for that? Is there a market already for that thing? You know, already pre-mixed, ready to go type thing in the fridge, ready to go?
Yeah, I got Costco sized.
I'm sure Bud Light has a flavor for it.
That's true. That's true.
Bud Light coffee.
Yeah.
Guys, so what's any quick community things before we dive in?
Sapphire's coming up, ASEC annual conference.
Like 6 weeks, 5 weeks?
Yeah, sure.
Week of June.
It depends on when you listen, so let's not get into the details. Hopefully see you there in June.
I think we've established we're all going except Mustafa. Sorry, Mustafa.
Yes, unfortunate. I can't meet up this time.
Is there anything happening down under?
Well, we've recently had some conferences. We had the Mastering Business Analytics conference down in Melbourne, which I attended. That was quite worthwhile, and there's been some user group sessions. And actually, I think it's in September, there's another follow-up analytics fest, or a tech fest, which is a little bit more agnostic, including SAP. So that's coming up as well from the same organizers as the analytics conference earlier.
So was that one also put on by Eventful? That was the one that was the same week as South Africa?
Yes,
or
that's correct.
Right after or during or before? Okay. Yeah. All right. I didn't realize you went to that one. So, okay. Cool.
Yeah, no, I've been to that one for the last few years. So.
Awesome. Well, yeah, it's close.
I was waiting for you to come and present at that one.
Well, let's see if I can swing them actually letting me come back and present. So see how much damage I did in South Africa. So
they didn't keep your passport, or No.
I'm not sure that they review environmental impact when they look at those sorts of things.
Oh. I guess the only other news is the mutton chops that you saw my face last podcast. Wife didn't approve, and they only lasted like 12 hours.
Yeah.
So I did have to. She wasn't talking to me, and I heard her talking to our attorney. So I went clean shaven. So enough about that, friends. We're here to talk about the future of Design Studio. I'm still going to call it Design Studio. You guys can call it whatever you want. I don't care. Hey, all right, let's start with that. What do you guys want to call it?
I vote for
Design Studio. Yeah.
Design Studio?
Yeah, well, probably Design Studio now, although it's an interesting, I guess, a marketing mistake, or, well, not Design Studio, but...
You just went right for the jugular, right?
We call them opportunities.
Sorry, Nick. Our bad.
No. I mean, well, it's interesting watching the marketing changes, starting with Design Studio, then merging with Lumira, and then all of a sudden you have the Discovery announcement, which has the kind of the collateral damage effect, and it almost seems like now it makes more sense to go back to Design Studio. So I guess we can watch that space.
I would predict SAP would give it another new name before going backwards. They don't tend to go backwards, do they?
Well, that's true. That's true.
maybe SAP Analytics on-premise application edition or whatever. But yeah, I don't think that they'd go back to where they've been. I think that even though Lumira Discovery's reaching maybe an earlier end of life, I was still calling it Design Studio just so I could keep the two different client tools separate, even for my own group, because if you just say Lumira, then that ended up meaning two things. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, and it's really,
go ahead, sorry.
well, I was just going to say, it's really hard too, where you have different users within your organization with varying levels of maturity with the tools and with SAP generally, right? Because it's, if they had never heard of it at all, and then you get into, well, it's Lumira this versus Lumira that, that's a different conversation than if they had Lumira before and Design Studio before, and then you're sending emails around that have Lumira in the subject line because it's Lumira Designer. It's kind of it's just, it takes a minute to sort of level set and get everybody using the same language and things like that. So I am looking forward to redoing that because I can't imagine that Lumira Designer will be the name for too awful long, but who knows? Who knows?
No.
Maybe it'll be Lumira, but not that Lumira. That'll be the name of the product.
There you go. Or maybe they'll listen to the podcast and they'll just keep Design Studio. I don't know. I'm still on 1.6, guys. So anytime I open up that beloved program, I'm still Design Studio. So as long as I'm rocking that, we don't really have a Lumira space right now. So Design Studio it is for us.
Awesome.
Did anybody actually run into resistance or negative connotation because it was called Lumira, or is that just us being crusty?
Within our organization, it wasn't necessarily negative, but it was just confusion before this most recent announcement about their change in direction. When they announced Lumira 2.0 initially, it was more management or other developers saying, "Hey, I hear they're getting rid of Design Studio, and now it's just going to be Lumira." I'm like, no. So nothing negative though. It was just confusion.
Yeah, no, I'll agree with that. And I think what ended up then happening was usage of longer terminology and specifically talking about Lumira Discovery versus Lumira Designer instead of just saying Lumira, because then that had the connotation of the previous Lumira of just being the discovery tool. So just had to make a distinction in communication.
Yeah.
Fortunately, the words discovery and designer have no other meaning in English, so that's helpful.
Yeah, I mean, you got Design Studio, and then you've got the SAC. Let's talk about that thing. The SAP Cloud, right? I mean, that's where this Lumira is going. So I don't know, terminology. I think we could hopefully squeeze Design Studio back into it, but I don't know.
Going right for the femoral, huh?
It really is. So we've assembled to really talk about what we want to see out of Design Studio. Still calling it Design Studio. You guys, I think, being some of the thought leaders in actually using this tool and building cool stuff and building community add-ons and all the neat things, guys. What's left for Design Studio? Like what are you hoping SAP does with it in the coming months and years? Let's discuss. That's when you go.
Well, I'll make a start.
All right, go.
Well, I don't know. I think to assist, I guess, one point that I've had for a while in terms of building collaborative applications, and I don't know if you've come across this, and maybe this is too technical, but in terms of the bookmarking functionality, that's improved a lot with 2.1. We know that they changed the architecture. But I think in terms of when they talk about global bookmarks, that's been one pain point for me, in that it's never really been truly global, in that if we want to build applications that let multiple users create visualizations like an online composition, and then save those as a bookmark. What I've found is that still doesn't let you edit other people's bookmarks, so you can't really build a global or a collaborative application, and particularly in the context where it's a bit of a contradiction in that SAP has allowed you to define bookmark folders and apply security and all of that, but that doesn't seem to work with the concept of global bookmarks. It's always the creator of the bookmark that has control over it. So that was one main area for me to facilitate more collaborative applications. I don't know what you guys think of that, or whether you've come across that issue.
We only use bookmarks in one of our applications, but we haven't run into like some of the specific, I think, needs that you mentioned around either folder specific, security at a more granular level, or ownership issues. Although we're traditionally a Bex web shop, so I think that bookmark concept will become more important, or more used, I should say. I don't know if important is the right word, as we start moving away from like the default Bex web template over to potentially a default analysis template for Design Studio for like those web-based OLAP use cases. So anyway, that's my feedback on bookmarks.
I'm kind of in the same boat as well. We don't have a whole lot of utilization of the bookmarks just yet. And again, we're 1.6, so I'd imagine maybe when we go to 2.0 or whatever we're going to call it, we may utilize it more. But for right now, it's not really a pain point for us just yet.
Yeah, we've purposely avoided them. Just we went 1.6 to 2 to 2.1. And so just seeing the changes that have gone between each of those, we realized that this was still a bit of an up in the air. So we were trying to not paint ourselves into a corner with it. So I think once, that concept stabilizes in there, we'd like to take more advantage of it. But to this point, we purposefully sort of stayed away.
Yeah, and I guess just to add a different thing that I'm trying to be, I guess, practical about is, this designer client's going to live a little longer, or at least receive another year's worth, let's say, of functionality improvements. You can't help but just wonder how high-hanging or low-hanging a fruit in terms of feature improvements they're really going to place into this. And what I mean is, like, if they're going to exert any effort on improving the tool, I would like to see improvements more around things like either stability or session management. There's a long-standing issue where, like, if you can imagine a use case scenario where you've got a group of testers all using the same test ID in one box, well, as soon as one person starts a designer application, if it's a long-running query, another concurrent session under that same name has to wait until that operation from another of the same user ID completes. And even if it's two different people, or one person is a dashboard designer just refreshing a dashboard in two different browser tabs, the point is that seems strange that it handles sessions in that way. So that's not really a feature as much as just an improvement in how the actual runtime performs. So my interest would be more first and foremost around the just performance aspect of it.
That sounds like a flaw in your test case, bro. Come on.
Okay. I mean, the use case can be wrong for sure, but I mean, even if it's just, like I said, one person, and if it's a designer who accidentally runs a long-running runaway universe or Bex query.
Whoa. I think I've identified your problem.
Yeah. Regardless of the source of data, though, if it is a runaway query, you cannot even launch the application again until that one completes under your own user ID. So that just seems like a gap to me.
Yeah, I'm curious to see from my perspective. I'm looking at it more from the visual side and the fine tuning pieces. I threw a quick notepad list down, just kind of improving some of the. We're starting to look at a little bit more infographics and things of that nature. So being able to have some custom icons, I think, Mike, you've developed a few things on the SDK side. But just having some of those things added to it, some visuals we've looked at. Ironically, there's not a Venn diagram anywhere within Design Studio, Lumira, third-party plugins, at least that I've been able to find. And at our current use cases, we have 4 different lines of business, and we have some overlap. We have visuals that, yes, we can fake it. We can have images and sort of doctor them up with text and that kind of thing. But if a user's changing a query and the overlap all of a sudden is a little bit, 50% versus 5%, that's a noticeable change, right? So I like to see a little bit more on the visual side. Those two things, I think a lot of the stuff is already in there. Maybe just more properties as well. So I'm looking more at the geo map. I haven't seen, again, I'm coming at it from the 1.6 world. So some of these things I don't think are in there. But one example is, looking at geo map. We were a customer of Centagon, hi Ryan, and we had the plugin for Excelsius, and we could literally control everything from start to finish. For example, the beginning color was, red, green, yellow. Now, if you do red and green, you get a nasty brown in the middle with zero control over that brown. So it got a little weird, right? When we went from Excelsius plugins with a plugin to Design Studio, thinking, oh, this is going to be great. Those are some just little things that really drove us nuts. Overall, it was a great addition, scripting and stuff like that. But that from our side, just improving the existing visuals, more properties, and that kind of thing. Again, we'll see at Sapphire. I think the SAC, the Analytics Cloud, or whatever, gets some scripting, at least maybe rumored, possibly, maybe not. But I don't know if that's where Design Studio's headed. So maybe that's where their developers are heading on that one. So that's from our perspective.
Yeah, I would agree that their maps, or really most of their visual components, aren't, or they're configurable up to a point, and usually that point is very low, and not only at design time, but even less so at runtime. If you look at all the new chart formatting capabilities that they added with the Designer 2.0 client for the chart, and I realize you're still on 1.6, so the good news is at runtime it gets a little better, or I'm sorry, at design time it gets a little better. But if then you wanted to script those changes, there's no new BI action language script method, so you still have to deal with multiple charts that are formatted differently and set visible off or on in order to at runtime kind of handle these different chart appearances. So I think that would be another thing in my mind that would be quite low effort for them to expose at the script layer. But I mean, to your point also, their maps are what they are, and they're quite limited. And I realize they kind of have to, SAP has to follow the rule of 80-20 in terms of, the functionality needs, and leave the other 20% to, partners or the customer to extend on their own. But I feel like their idea of what 80% is different than what my idea of 80% is.
I would definitely agree with that statement for sure.
Yeah. And I guess along that line, if it is a partner or a customer that needs to fill that extra 20%, as an SDKer, and as you guys know, I mean, you can do some really cool things with it, but the barrier of entry in terms of how to skill up on that is so high that I think it's unrealistic for them to expect that the average customer will staff and resource and train a person in like a BI role to do those type of things. So whether it be in Lumira Designer that they improve that SDK experience, or in their new Analytics Cloud or future application development product, just making that SDK experience a whole lot more streamlined and more accessible to like your average developer would go a long way, I think, too.
Yeah, and Mike, you're a good person to ask this question to. What would it take for adding HTML language to some of these properties to be able to control via HTML scripting and some of those titles and that kind of thing.
Well, I kind of went on a tangent about that in the last podcast about just HTML in general, and I think that SAP is taking the approach of not allowing for like malformed HTML or something that could corrupt the document object model of a web page. But I wish they had like a pro mode or a bumper lane mode for people who don't know what they're doing, but they just really have this single mode of operation where they have to cater to the lowest common denominator. But and that's why I find myself so readily hitting the limits in terms of the customization of their out of the box options, where somebody who comes from a web developer background, it's quite tempting to just want to fall back on what you know, which is HTML. So if they allowed better ways to go about that without having to get into gnarly SDK guts, that would be great. But
yeah, I mean, things like being able to bold or unbold or italicize different labels, return just a paragraph break, just simple things on the mouse over, I'm thinking, to be able to control for multiple measures. One example we're running up against right now is we have custom shape files, and we can put up one measure in there, but what we want to show multiple measures. I mean, it's not unrealistic to expect to see sales. Maybe there's a promoter score, marketing in there, and then if you go to a push pin setup, you get the address or the label, the dimension, whatever you want to call it. There is no measure at that level for a push pin. So it's things like that, from just being able to control it to being able to customize it. Just kind of wrap up that point, just to go above and beyond what we currently have. More features, more options. So
right.
Well, I agree, but to Mike's point earlier, like I'm far more interested in some of the performance and things like that than I am with individual features, right? So if they've only got another year to put into it, I want them to fix things that you can't fix with an extension, right? So I have to believe that sort of data management, session management, those are going to be much easier to do in the application itself than with some sort of extension. And then once you get to charts, obviously go as far as you can there once everything's rock solid from the performance and stability standpoint. But if I need to enlist a partner or some sort of development help, I'm more comfortable doing it there than on the inner workings of the app.
Just call Mike. Mike will fix it.
That's what I do. Well, so that's an interesting question. So maybe to the customers, like philosophically, does it sort of chap your ass that your first instinct has to be, I hope it works, otherwise I'm calling a partner to help me to build a dashboard?
When you say you hope it works, do you mean from a stability and performance standpoint or from a functionality standpoint?
Yes. Is somebody vacuuming while we're podcasting?
Maybe. No, not.
Roomba going on? I mean, what's going on over there?
Is that a room, Jamie? Is your Roomba scooping poop again? Sorry, wrong.
You just
venue?
triggered me.
All right, back to the question.
So yes, from a performance standpoint, it does irritate me or tap my rear when the application doesn't behave as expected, and there's a note explaining it's by design when that doesn't make it feel any better. But from a functionality perspective, at least us as a customer, I'm not as hung up on that, just because we happen to be in a scenario where they can come to me, my group can come to me and I can throw an extension together if it really is a deal breaker to get a dashboard off the ground. A good example being, I had to do 2 custom components last week, and that is an anomaly. It's not like I'm cranking them out in-house every week or anything, but they wanted a histogram, and they always wanted one of the plots in the histogram to be highlighted based off of a prior dashboard operation, and you can't really do that with the out of the box thing, and they really got hung up on that. And so you're thinking, this dashboard does everything else that the business wants except for this one thing, and they're really gonna say, well, this is unacceptable. Like, we're gonna have to look at another solution. So that part I feel better about us being able to handle, but yeah, I feel like maybe a broken record. The part that does bother me is the stability and performance piece of it. I do want it to be a rock solid, reliable thing there, because I can't go and choke their neck. I can choke my own neck, or shore up the functionalities.
So I'll admit that tuning Design Studio at the platform level to perform well under varying circumstances is as much art as it is science. But is your expectation as a WYSIWYG dashboarding tool that you're going to get sub-second response time? Like, what are we talking about here?
Yes.
Okay, let's put it this way, Eric. When you click a button in Design Studio, and maybe that button does nothing more than change the visibility of a chart, that's a round trip back to the server, and that can take 2 to 3 seconds to complete. I mean, regardless of how beefy, and I don't know why, but regardless of how much RAM or whatever that we throw at our Lumira server APSs. So that's just a strange experience to have when you think of other web apps that are quite more responsive, where it's all client side for like UI related operations. So I don't think it's outside of the realm of expectation that it should act a little snappier.
Well, I'll agree with that. That's an interesting point. The round trip, and it seems to be almost a hangover from the web application designer days. I think probably it's, as you say, it makes sense in those situations to have all of that client side. I think it's unlikely that, because of the architecture of Design Studio, it's unlikely that we'll get that kind of improvement or that change in the architecture to enable that in Design Studio itself. But perhaps with the SAC Designer, given that that's all web-based, that's potentially an improvement that they could introduce there. But I'm not sure that we'll see that in Designer, just because of the way it's been architected at the moment.
Yeah, I would agree. It's got a lot of DNA from Beck's Web Application Designer, so it's very Ajax snippet round trip oriented. I think it'd be unrealistic to expect that the architecture would change at this point of its lifespan. And to your point, I mean, hopefully the Analytics Cloud, its equivalent, will have more client side where it makes sense, kind of state management that doesn't require going all the way back to the server to do such small operations.
That'd be the hope, right? That would be improved. I mean, the fact that the Excelsius days, I mean, God bless it. We had some great features in that.
For Excelsius.
Exactly, and that's
Mike just dumps it out of his keyboard.
my crotch has got Yingling on it now, so.
It's a small price, right? It's a small price. So I don't know. There are things that I'm looking at as well, and it might be a varying topic here, but I'd like to see some portability. I mean, who remembers the fact that you could take an Excelsius doc and, God knows, embed it wherever you wanted to? I mean, bring the data with it.
Yeah.
We have some challenges with that, some portability issues, and I don't know if there's a viewer, a desktop viewer. I'm not sure what the fix is, and maybe it gets back to the architectural point. Maybe we'll never have that ever again. But that's one thing that I've always thought about, would be the portability of these dashboards. Maybe we don't want to hit the server every time we refresh. Maybe we could cache that data somewhere, but I don't know. That's one topic that I keep looking at, is portability.
I guess they tried to do that earlier with the
offline.
well, not just the offline. So firstly, I think we had the click-through, where you exported the file and everything was included in there, but only for certain paths. And I guess that was meant to be the prelude to the offline, and now we've got the offline, which I guess does do the caching or actually embeds the data in the document, and that helps as well. But I'm not sure at this stage whether we'll see that type of embeddability portability that you mentioned with Excelsius, where it's the complete package and you can put it anywhere. But I see the point.
Well, what about portability from a mobility perspective, right? Is anybody trying to deploy these on BI Mobile and love it or hate it?
We do. We've done phone and iPad. Most recently phone, or attempted to do a responsive phone iPad app. But I mean, I would agree with Robert and probably Jamie as well. There's just something different with, you know, having to load up a web server or a bunch of HTML, JavaScript, CSS, and all the network chatter that goes behind that versus like a self-contained Swift file. I mean, that's just so much that, I mean, it's literally self-contained for most of its logic besides potentially having to reach back to an online data source. And like Robert mentioned, the ability to embed that data and then distribute it in a fairly portable way for anybody who's got, you know, Flash player installed is something that we no longer have. But for mobile use cases, the ability to cache it in a maybe a more usable way and have that nice kind of mobile experience that we all expect, I would love. But that's not the experience that we have right now.
Is there an HTML5 answer to the Swift?
I'd say, you know, if you look at other JavaScript libraries from a UI perspective, sure, right? But I mean, that would require an architectural change, in my opinion, from how they've done HTML5 in Design Studio, which is kind of like a mixture of free-floating divs and UI5 and some CVOM charts along with all the back-end communication. So I think that you could get a similar Swift effect with the right UI libraries.
Well, but they're not going to do that this year, right?
Or
I
ever?
don't think they'll do it with Design Studio. I think that they're probably looking ahead to whatever the next big thing is from their product offering.
I think that was enough for Jamie to.
My dog's barking too. I think I'm gonna have to let her in a second.
Yeah, real world problems.
Yeah. But what I'm hearing though is, I mean, we all are users of Design Studio and want these different, this different spectrum of features, whether it be features or stability. So I'm just kind of wondering though, how much to expect versus how much we want, given the life cycle of it.
Yeah.
Well, and how far does it really need to get, right? I mean, you know, I think it has shown that it can largely replace dashboards, right? Which was my first question, right? And I think it can replace it from a 90% functionality perspective. I think it can. I was very worried that my Celsius developers weren't going to be able to pick it up, but you know, it's been sort of a slow, scary journey. But you know, overall, I'd say that that's been successful with the help of some, you know, partners and experiences and things like that. You know, I mean, to me, it's already the sort of best on-premise option for developing an interactive analytic application. How much more do we really need out of it that's not, you know, either performance related or a nice to have?
I like your word there, application, because that's what we're doing as well. I mean, we're beyond the point of a dashboard. I mean, as much as this chat's kind of, you know, talking about, you know, what we want from Design Studio, just call it, you know, Design Studio. I actually like the tool. I've got to give a little credit there. It does do some things well. It's brought a couple of languages. That learning curve can be a little steep for the Excelsius guys, but I mean, it provides a lot of flexibility. The HTML, the CSS. I mean, I'm a fan of it. I like to see other things, added to it. But we really are creating applications. I mean, there's a lot in here. We're so beyond dashboarding with Design Studio with our current outset that we've been able to replace 5, 6, 7 dashboards with one application. So I think there's something to be said about that factor for sure.
But how well does it print?
Without an extension?
That's the problem.
Print it from my email? Is that what you?
Exactly. No, that's well said. I mean, I'm sort of I'm with you, right? I am a fan of Design Studio as well for a WYSIWYG application builder. Like, you have to sort of think beyond it being just a dashboarding tool, because it's not just a dashboarding tool. It's creating complex information architectures and flows, and if you've got the complexity and the experience to extend it in other ways, it scales to do so. But it inevitably comes at a price of performance. Hey, I want to pull in 10 billion cells of data. Why doesn't this run great? Kind of problems that an end user is never going to want to think through. Only smart guys like you are going to think through. So it's an answer for a product for you guys, right? Not Jamie. Jamie's dumb. No, I'm kidding, Jamie. I love it.
I think I always reach a point where I wonder if I should just be writing a native web application instead of a BI application, let's call it. And that's really where you reach a turning. I think internally you reach a turning point to say, if you need like super performance or super buttery smooth UI, go shop that out in your organization or with somebody who has the skill set to do it, to make a real web app, and tap into those actual underlying tables, versus trying to use Design Studio to do too much of something that feels like that would be better served to be just a web app. And yeah, there's some disadvantages that come along with that, because you can't interact with the universe semantic layer, or you can't use their BWBix protocol for the Jamie, one of us that uses BW. Mustafa will back me up, but so there are some trade-offs for thinking about it in that way, but there are some benefits, because you have ultimate control over how you want your that type of application to function. So I think that there's probably a middle ground, and I feel like Design Studio is pretty close to that middle ground.
That sounds cost prohibitive.
You think? I mean, I think I look at some of the hoops that we have to jump through that we could do, with a simple JavaScript HTML front end. If it weren't just for the data source connectivity piece, I feel like if you put it in the right .NETter's hands, or Fiori, if that's your thing, type team's hands, or whatever your favorite UI would be, that some of the things that we've done are quite simple, but we're having to do a lot of acrobatics to achieve the same kind of look and feel in a Design Studio app.
You're talking about a resource, right? A resource for having those skill sets. Our team was mostly a Webby BobJ team. We've got database architects, we've got SQL developers, Webby analysts, Webby reporters.
But outside of BI, right? I mean,
right.
You're talking about outside of BI, you would
got to go and find that outside. Absolutely. I mean, the trade-off there again is going outside, but you have far more control. So there is that fine balance.
Right.
I agree in terms of that balance in Design Studio meeting the appropriate middle ground. In that, I don't think we should look at Design Studio as a full-featured, detailed app. I mean, it's for analytical application development, but not the traditional full-blown web app. And if that's the requirement you have, then Mike's approach, I think, makes sense. And even with the issues with connectivity, there are certain things you can do. Might be an effort to begin with, but then you've got the infrastructure in place. And as an example, several years ago, before Design Studio was even in the picture in the Web Application Designer days. I remember seeing a presentation at one of the analytics, eventual analytics conferences there. It was titled "Putting Lipstick on a Pig," and it basically showed how actually the company was Rio Tinto, one of the big mining companies. And they were running BW, and they wanted a nicer dashboard front end. And the presenter was showing how what they did was they basically created a web service integration with BW, and then the front end was a web application, and back then they used Fusion charts, and actually that was the Flash days, but they put a really impressive front end, interactive front end. So it is possible, and requires a bit of investment up front. But once you've got the infrastructure, potentially makes it easier if you want to go in that direction. So it's, I guess, reaching a balance between the resources we have and the audience for what Design Studios intended, versus if you have pure web developers to do the more expansive type of application.
It's funny because I completely agree, or to carry your analogy further with lipstick on a pig, this last project that we worked on, what's still going on underway for the mobile Design Studio application, I feel like the developer that's worked on that has spent probably 70% of his time on the lipstick and 30% of the time on the pig. And I mean, and then that's what the customers are hung up on, is that, you know, that the look and the cosmetics of it versus the function. And that's something that I don't know if SAP they weighted that way, where they focus on the lipstick as much as they do the pig, so to speak, without a lot of manual CSS messing around. So I mean, anyway, it just seems like those are two areas of focus. And yeah, the web application designer days did not have much lipstick out of the box.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of our guys, they just want to export to Excel. I mean, I'm sure that's across the board here. I just want to export this data to Excel. And I actually have to give some kudos over there, Eric, on, I'm not sure if we can name names on there, but I gave you the high five on one of the designs with your offerings over there. So, and I've stolen a few cues from you on that one, because we have a very similar. We're looking at 10 million people. We want to slice and dice it by like 16 or 17 different ways, and throw geography in there. And great, this looks good. There's the lipstick, but the pig is the Excel part that they want. They just want to see the figures and how it comes out from a marketing organization. So, can I reach these people? So I don't know. I think the lipstick's important. Absolutely, users get hung up on that whole visual. But the design and the actual export, I think, is where the key comes in.
Excel is undefeated.
It is. It is, and will forever be.
I hate to be the guy to shamelessly plug myself, but this is the thing. Shut up.
Don't do it.
I gave you the leeway to do it, right?
He did. He set me up. No, guys, I talked about this in sort of that next generation analytics presentation I got to give last year. So last year we moved in with a local user experience, human-centered design shop here in St. Louis. They're our friends. They're a great partner. And the thing that we realized is we as BI people, as analytics people, have begun to encroach on the territory of what user experience developers have really gotten right over the years, right? They think about how humans interact with things, not just data, but things. And so involving them in our programs and thinking through how can I best expose this data sort of gave us a new lens. And I'm telling you, finding a BI developer that can think that way, they're unicorns. They're sort of hard to find. You guys can code anything, but a user experience designer thinks thoughtfully about information architecture and lots of things in ways that we don't. And they're perfect for bringing into a design studio project, even if just to consult, to say, how would you approach presenting this? And sure, they're going to want to build something in a native application that's way more open than an SAP type tool. But those types of principles can absolutely be applied to a design studio project and have tremendously good outcomes. Like Robert just gave me a high five for.
I think Robert's kind of in a unique, special position where he gets a little of that because if I'm not mistaken, you said in one of your presentations you're in marketing, so you have some UX guys and some art folks that can tell you what's pretty and what's ugly and help out along the way.
Yeah, we send an email out. I mean, they do typical web design, right? I mean, they're front facing to millions of people every single day, and they know it works. Even as simple as having a standard scheme, a color scheme, where you're not, I find that a little bit. It may sound contradictory, but if you're given 10 colors and you can pick from those, it takes the guesswork out of, oh, what color should I choose? And these color schemes and design principles have been well thought out by people who actually get it. I think our guys partnered with Apple at one point to come up with some design techniques. So, I mean, we've been around the block in terms of the design, and I just, hey, I'll call so and so up and take them to coffee or present a wireframe of something, and an hour or two or maybe a day or two depending upon how busy they are, we've got a working great design principle, and it took them minutes or hours, and I would have never gotten there. So yeah, we sit in a unique spot. My boss is the original architect of the data warehouse, and then I sit three virtual cubes, we work from home, away from the design guys. So it is a unique spot, but I definitely can second to all the things that are said about finding those design folks and bringing them in just to see what it looks like. They actually are interested in seeing from the data side how we come up with some of these things, and they think that we're geniuses because we can write SQL. So it's kind of a funny thing, right? Where we're on our own little playground. We do what we do well, but at the other side of the other playground, they're like, man, that's impressive. You can write SQL. You can do some scripting. Yeah, we can do that. I just need your good ideas and good for design principles.
Yeah, my wife will walk past my computer and she'll be like, "You're a genius." I'm just kidding. She never says that, but yeah.
Yeah, nobody believed that for a minute. All right, guys. Listen, this has been a super duper fun show. I think we all hope Design Studio still has some legs, and if you're listening, SAP, don't kill it, and change the name back, or to something different. All right. On that note, guys, thanks so much, and hopefully we'll see you in town at some point.
All right. See you. Cheers, guys.
See you in Sapphire.
Enjoy Superman and Avengers Infinity Wars.
Stop it.